black yourself out on the screen if you'd like, or log off if you'd like to. I just want to thank everyone for being here today for our Red Zone Prevention Friday event for our resilience in our BIPOC purchase community. I'm really excited for this event. When we talked about doing Red Zone and kind of revamping what Red Zone would look like this semester as we went virtual, we were asking our students what they really wanted. And this was one of the main things that they had asked for us to touch on from wellness. So I'm really excited to have Akeera here to help me lead the discussion. Akeera has done a lot of really great work for our BIPOC community. And so I'm excited to see what we can cover today. As a reminder, this is a safe space, so anything that's said here, we ask that everybody respect that, and that we give each other our space to respect our own opinions, and that we say things out of compassion for each other. I want to briefly give Akeera a chance to introduce herself. Akeera works with our counseling center and is an overall rock star for our community. So if you want to take a second and introduce yourself?
Sure, way to put me in a spot. I see some new faces and new names, so thank you for welcoming me to the discussion, and thank you for the introduction, Lauren. Like Lauren mentioned, I am Akeera Peterkin. I'm one of the counselors at the counseling center. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I also am a counselor, credentialed counselor for alcohol and substance abuse, as well as a certified poetry therapist. So at Purchase, I am in the counseling center working with students, but I also have a private practice that specializes in intersectionality, trauma, and identity. So I really love working with cultures and different communities, and really helping to cultivate a sense of healing and a sense of growth and resiliency. So that's what brings me here, and thank you again for having me.
Of course. And Akeera also sits on our coalition, the Collegiate Alliance for Student Success and Prevention, has been an advocate for our students in that way as well. So yes, like I said, rock star. That's the only way to describe it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, that's very kind of you, but I don't know if I'm that much of a rock star. Maybe a hip hop star. I'm kidding.
There we go. We'll take it. We'll take it.
Yes.
All right. So when I reached out to Akeera to see what we could do for these discussions, she was a big advocate in making sure that we talked about the resiliency in this community. And so I wanted to kind of read the definition of resiliency. And of course, there are several, but this one I thought was a really good one. That resiliency is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or a significant source of stress. And it can also involve profound personal growth. So I really loved that definition because it touched on, the process and the struggle, but also this positive aspect of personal growth. And I think that that's really what we're going to focus on here today in our conversation, is that aspect of how amazing our students who are going through everything that 2020 has to bring, and the special challenges that our BIPOC community has faced, and what has come out of it, the effective coping mechanisms, the self-care, and this personal growth. So yeah. So we wanted to provide a forum for any of our students who wanted to talk right now about things that they've been experiencing and any of their effective coping strategies during these past couple of months now, or past couple of years. Has anything really stood out in your repertoire of self-care and coping strategies that you wanted to share?
I definitely want to reiterate, Lauren, for a second, because we want this to be as a conversation. So feel free to jump in with any of your personal experiences or anything you notice about your peers or your family and how they're coping with the epic year of 2020, or the apocalypse we're facing, right? So definitely join the conversation.
And anyone who wants to join on chat, that's welcome to. I know we're not all ready to be camera ready.
Yes.
If nobody's ready to speak yet, I have a couple of things I printed out that I thought were pretty powerful that might get our heads working. So we had some students out of the University of Texas that wrote about the journey of being resilient as a BIPOC student at the University of Texas. So this one says, I have come to know that being resilient is not to have to seek validation from others, but to honor and uplift myself during or despite messaging from the outside world. Pretty powerful, I thought.
I would like to comment on that.
Yeah.
It feels very appropriate to me as an individual, and I feel many people probably agree. I personally am a mixed individual, so I have many different ethnic identities. I'm African, I'm Native, I'm Malaysian, like I have a lot of different things going on. And sometimes I feel almost as if there's not a group for me. Like the closest group I can get is like a mixed community, but even that has so much, diversity in it that no one really shares the exact same experience. So it's a little difficult for me to say sometimes how I self-care, because sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just, get sad about it, and sometimes I don't know what to do. But ultimately, kind of what the quote said, I try as hard as I can to validate myself, because, it's not really on anyone else to do that. And sometimes you can't, expect that. You can't rely on that. So it's definitely been a journey for me to, self-validate. So I agree with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I can hear how it's kind of difficult to feel like you have a sense of community that you can belong to, right? And having all these different mixed identities, although it creates a beautiful person and a beautiful soul, I can see how it can sometimes feel isolating. Like who's your tribe, right? Um, I actually also echoed the quote too, Lauren, because as you were reading that, it reminded me of a writing I started over the summer, and it's called The R Word. And in the R Word, I really talk about racism, but also resiliency too. And so I define what racism is, but then right after I share an experience of racism, I show how resilient an individual is in spite of racism, right? So the world sending these messages of like you don't belong, these messages of like you're not enough, these messages of like something's wrong with you. Resiliency is really fighting against those messages that we get on a daily basis, and rising above and waking up every day in spite of all that, those different messages we're taking in and absorbing throughout this country. So it definitely reminded me of that piece that I started over the summer.
That's awesome. Thank you, Akeera.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Well, Akeera, I wanted to give you some time to talk about the origins of self-care, because you actually taught me about the actual origins of self-care, and I was really surprised that this is not something I had known. I guess I shouldn't be surprised at this point at my lack of education when it comes to these topics. But I wanted you to give you some space to share that with everybody, because I really love that story.
Yeah, I mean, does anyone else know the origins of self-care or the movement? Right. I mean, go figure. We live, no offense to anybody, we live in a whitewashed country, right? And they kind of appropriate different things. But yeah, so the origins of self-care started. It started as a medical word when it came to it's people who were in institutionalized settings, right? But it really took off as a movement in regards to the Black Panther movement. So the Black community started this. They wanted to fight against medical racism, so systemic racism, and all the racism the Black community was facing. And then Audre Lorde really propelled the movement even further in her writing, when she talks a lot about her struggles with cancer, her struggles as a queer Black woman, and all the intersectional experiences she was having regarding oppression. And one of her well-known quotes is saying, like, taking care of myself is not self-indulgent, it's an act of self-preservation. It's a political warfare, right? So really what we know as self-care today when it comes to like spas and getting nails done and all the luxurious ways that we think about it, or even like meditation and yoga, it really stems from a political movement with the Black community, recognizing that we have to preserve ourselves and take care of ourselves and fight for ourselves. And the first way to do that is by giving ourselves the care that we need in order to keep the justice going, or the fight for justice going on a daily basis. So I've been trying to really push that within not just the white community, but also the Black and brown community. Because what I find is a lot of the times Black and brown people think it's selfish to like take a second to take care of themselves. We're often being taught that we have to look out for each other, and we're not really taught that we also have to take care of ourselves too. And so I've been really pushing my Black and brown clients to recognize, like, we started the self-care movement, right? And it's important, if we're telling people we matter, we also have to recognize we matter too. So I've been trying to let people be aware of the origins of self-care.
That's really powerful, Akeera, you know, that if the community is saying we matter, you really need to point the finger back at yourself and take care of yourself too. That's really powerful.
Yeah. And I think Audre Lorde's quote is definitely I mean, at least for me personally, it definitely sits with me. Just the idea that we're preserving ourselves, right? So I've been telling people, like, look how resilient the BIPOC community is. Like, everywhere we turn, people are trying to keep us down. People are trying to pretty much kill us, right? And so the fact that we're still here in spite of all the systemic stuff that we face, in spite of all the personal tragedies that we face, we're still waking up, and we're still going to work, and we're still putting the labor in. And so self-care is definitely the only way we can help preserve ourselves, because we know our communities, or the societal communities, is not really preserving us in the way that we ought to be preserved.
Absolutely.
I wanted to say as well, sorry to cut you off, I do notice sometimes in the Black community, like, self-care is viewed as like a white people thing. Like, you have to have a certain amount of luxury or wealth in order to obtain that. And again, it's very messed up, because essentially being a person of color in America, like, you are constantly like an attack, like trying to preserve yourself as a daily action, because either people are trying to exploit you or they're trying to erase you. So, like, you definitely need that. Like, it's not just to one race, like, everyone needs it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
definitely true.
Mm-hmm. And self-care was such an important part of our discussion today. As a reminder, Red Zone is the first 8 weeks on any college campus when students are at greatest likelihood of experiencing assault, injury, or overdose. And so, you know, when we're talking about preventing any of those things, we want to talk about how we can reduce our risk, and self-care is absolutely one of those. And so, you know, when I brought that up to Akeera and she brought up the origins, for me, the puzzle pieces fit right together, that this was absolutely the discussion that we needed to have during this presentation. So, so Matt, I wonder if you wanted to jump on. I hate to put you on the spot, but Matt really talks a lot about self-care and.
Lauren, give me a second. Not yet. Hold on.
Mm-hmm. Well, any of us can jump in, I guess. But when we talk about, you know, the different things that one can do for self-care, because we had a whole conversation about self-care earlier in this Red Zone Prevention series, I wonder if anyone wanted to speak to a little bit about the benefits of self-care and maybe some personal experience with self-care and the benefits that they've seen.
Also, if you notice what happens when we don't practice self-care too, right? I think that's also relevant as well.
Absolutely.
So if I can use an example of me, this is a very big growth that I was actually speaking about today with my boyfriend, about how I learned a big lesson in self-care. Because in my younger years, I'm not that old, but when I was younger, I was doing student leadership, and I noticed, like, I never set boundaries for myself. Like, I never tapped out of it, first of all. So even when I was going to bed, I was like checking emails, doing presentations, like, it just never stopped. But also in terms of like giving people emotional support, like, I was basically like an open channel. Like, yes, talk to me at any point in the day, call me at 3 a.m., like, I don't care. And while part of me is still in agreement with that for like emergencies, I also understand I need like just a time where it's no longer acceptable and it's me time, and I can't be doing that every single second. And I realized at the time it was like setting me off in these ways of like, I was always turned on. I never did anything for myself. And it showed in like my health. Like I was not okay in many ways, physically and mentally. So that is a huge benefit of that. Just being okay, like having energy to do things for yourself is so important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, the what we hear a lot of times with our students who come in who are looking for help with substance misuse is that they haven't been doing these things to take care of themselves. And so, you know, it feels like we have no time to do anything. And like Anna, I'm sorry, I've asked you several times.
Anna's fine, thank you.
Anna. So the thing is, I have a 5-year-old daughter, so Anna and Frozen is stuck in my mind now. But so when we see our students and they're saying that they've gotten to a point of having a negative relationship with substances and using substances to what they call self-medicate, they haven't been doing these things to do self-care, and they feel like they don't have the time to do that. So they've kind of resorted to maybe using substances or doing these quick fix type things, and it's kind of backfiring on them because maybe now they can't sleep as a result of it, or they're experiencing some withdrawal symptoms, or they're experiencing some more academic problems as a result of this. So so we really like to stress how important it is to do these preventative measures and taking care of yourself, so that you don't end up in a situation where you're not able to take care of yourself and you've created a situation where you have extra obstacles with the substances. So so again, you know, when we talk about this in the terms of red zone and the concern for overdose or injury, that's definitely something to consider.
Yeah. And can I just comment on what you just shared, Anna, and thank you for sharing and being so honest with us. I love the fact that you really pointed out the boundaries, right, as like the go-to self-care that you're starting to learn and recognize the importance of, right? Because it definitely, one of the things we were talking about before is a lot of times self-care, we have this image of like yoga or massage or like the things that really sometimes we need money, or sometimes we need I always say wellness is a stance of privilege, right? Because when you're trying to get your basic needs met, you really can't focus on the other stuff, right? And so what you're tapping into is something that anyone can really implement regardless of their access to resources. And it's really about the boundaries we can implement, right? And like recognizing, I used the example of we are all a water well, and the people around us depend on water to come to us. But if we're not replenishing our water supply, there goes the community that rely on our water supply, and there goes us as well, right? And so boundaries is really what allows us to take the time to pause and replenish our stock. But many of us struggle with setting boundaries, to be honest. I'm one of those at some times, right? And I notice when I don't set boundaries for myself, I am struggling to be there for my clients and my students, right? And so one of the things I've been really trying to be mindful of is in regards to all the stuff that's happening in the world and its impact on me and how much I'm absorbing it, and recognizing to stop watching the politics, stop being on social media, right? Asking for help, right? Really having a conversation with my boss in regards to like, I can't do this, right? This is too much for me. And that being okay and asking for help too.
Yeah, I also wanted to say, like, the analogy of like the water and like giving it out to people, I think is really helpful to demystify the stigma that setting boundaries is selfish, because ultimately helping yourself and self-preservation is not selfish. It's absolutely necessary to be happy and to live a fulfilling life. And especially if you want to help others, which, by the way, the people that usually help others are usually the ones getting drained. If you want to do that, you have to replenish. Like, it helps everyone, but especially yourself.
I hear that. And Akeera, since you do direct work with students, I'm wondering how you kind of break that myth that self-care needs to be this like big, time-consuming, expensive process. I'm wondering how you help students break that down and explain that self-care is something that can be accessed by everyone and is very individual as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm big on so it's probably the poet in me, but I'm big on analogies, right? And so the first thing I really try to help people to see is recognizing their own personal values and worth. So usually I use the analogy of like we're all diamonds, and not everyone that comes to our diamond shop can afford our diamonds, right? And so it's really recognizing at the end of the day that our worth, we demand and command our worth to other people. So that's the first thing I really do. Is I really try to reinstill our own personal values in oneself, and that allows people to see the importance of setting boundaries. We don't want to give our diamond away for free or for $5. We really want to have people work towards earning us, right? And then the other thing I do is I more, especially more lately, I've been pushing Audre Lorde's words. I've also been allowing people to recognize self-care can look different for all of us, right? And so as much as I believe in, let's say like meditation, I personally don't practice meditation, right? And I sometimes joke with my clients of like, I'm probably the worst therapist out there. I don't practice meditation. But for me, what I find to be helpful is like artwork, right? And you find whatever you think is helpful for you. So whether it's writing or art or asking for help, calling a friend. I help clients to and students to recognize self-care can look different for all of us, but the thing that remains consistent is the fact that we're feeling better at the end of whatever it is, right? And we're feeling better in a healthy way. So it's not really using substances, right? Because that's the other thing. People, you can feel better, but is that really sustainable? Is that really maintaining your health in the long run? So really just the educational piece, the reinstilling one's sense of value and worth, and using the analogies that I usually give to students too.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hearing you talk, it makes me think about the relationship between self-care and resilience. And, you know, in reading more about resilience and preparing for today, there's a lot of research that points to the fact that that some people there is a part of resilience that is inherent that can a person is maybe born with, but a lot of it is a learned skill. And so I'm wondering if anyone wants to speak to that, the relationship between self-care and resilience, and maybe any experience y'all have.
Well, an interesting kind of point to put the piggyback on maybe a little bit is when it comes to resilience, and maybe a certain type of resilience that may or may not apply to everybody. There's been findings like as that people's heart rate variability, which means like sort of being able to like cardiovascularly work out at some level that doesn't have to be very high, can lead to a better resilience with hard emotions. And I think as a therapist, and as many therapists don't prescribe that to people or themselves or think about it that way, but those that hearts are used to going up and down with cardiovascular effort can also seem to do better with resilience from hard emotions. And that's an interesting thing that I don't think is talked about a lot. And that just could involve walking, getting used to doing that or more. But interesting piece to resilience, and a certain type of resilience, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, I actually want to piggyback off of what you're saying, Matt, because I think we sometimes forget that the mind and the body's connected, right? And so with all the research that's coming out, we're hearing and realizing more and more that our mind influences our body and vice versa. So the fact that like being active, right, can help strengthen the heart and strengthen the body and strengthen the mind, can also cultivate a sense of resilience. So I love the fact that you threw in the health perspective there too, the physical perspective there too, because I think we often ignore the two when we're speaking about the one. And so I think it's important for us to see when we're eating well, when we're sleeping well, when we have physical activity, that is also strengthening our ability to be resilient, especially with the pandemic that's going on. The best thing we can do is making sure we have good healthy sleep and healthy eating, and staying active to keep the immune system going, and also keep the mind in a healthy place too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The physical tie-in also, I just want to emphasize the point is that when one is feeling upset, stressed, frustrated, or something, you're elevated, some systems in your body are sort of in an elevated state, and it's training your body to learn to come down from that, which you can train by just learning it to exercise and teaching your heart and your systems to go up and down as you need them, or a better, quicker down to recover and sort of hit baseline or find calmness or find grounding. So I always thought that's a really interesting, tie in together. That is not talked about enough in mental health and resiliency, I think.
Wow, some really good conversations here, y'all. And as we continue the conversation, it's something that I am particularly interested as a white ally on our campus is how white allies can be supportive to our BIPOC community, our students, faculty, staff at Purchase when we're talking about resilience. And I'm wondering if anyone wants to speak to that.
I guess it's just a small comment, but it's a small action overall, but it has a huge impact if you just validate your POC friends and their communities. Like your opinion is not necessarily at the forefront in that moment. Say if someone was at the hand of some violence, like whether it be verbally or physically, it is not your place to tell them whether or not that was real. And the most effective way, and people can be doing that without even realizing. So it's not like you're a bad person. It's just we are taught to be critical of everything. But in those situations, it's more of an emotional type of sharing. And so the best response is just to validate and say, like, I'm so sorry that happened to you. What do you need from me? I'm here for you, however you want. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I see also, I don't know, Arabia. I see Arabia is also second in you, and I guess I'm gonna definitely third you with that one too, right? Because as you were saying that, I was thinking about the circle of violence. It's not coming to me right now, but when it comes to the wheel of violence, right? And in regards to domestic violence, I've been also looking at it through the lens of systemic oppression too. And as you were saying, Anna, when it came to people of color sharing their experience with their white friends or white allies or white loved ones or white people in their circle in general, they're often met with gaslighting. Right? Are you sure that happened? Is that really what happened? Or maybe they didn't really intend to do it like that, right? Instead of like simply just validating and supporting the individual, saying like, I hear you, I'm sorry. The other thing is a lot of white people, it was interesting to see what white people reached out to me, because I'm around a lot of white people. I've grown up in predominantly white areas my entire life, right? And so it was interesting to see who reached out to me for Black Lives Matter. And I also recognize sometimes white people don't know what to say. Sometimes they don't know what to do, and sometimes they just feel like by saying something they might say the wrong thing. So the way I've also been helping to reassure the white people in my circle is saying like, what would you do if I lost a loved one? Right? Chances are you're going to reach out and extend your condolences and see how you can help, whether it's by sending me meals or giving me a phone call or taking something off of my shoulders, right? And it's kind of similar. I mean, Black and brown people throughout the country are grieving, and we all know how to extend our empathy, but it seems really weird to me that when it comes to racism, we feel stuck and we feel frozen. But it's the same thing we tap into to help with a friend who's grieving a loved one. It's the same thing we can do to our loved ones who are grieving because of the racism they're experiencing. Just utilize some empathy.
Thank you both so much. So validation and empathy.
Akeera, it's kind of interesting. One of my closest friends in the world, who I've been friends with since sophomore year in high school, which is 1991, is Black. And we've lived together for a period of time in Cambridge, Mass. We were friends in high school. We've been in touch and never lost touch. And when I called him sometime, whenever Black Lives Matter was kind of I forgot the month, but it was a few months ago. And we have times when we've been not in touch, and we have times when we'd be a little further in touch, but it was one of the more sensitively discussed conversations on my end, because we've talked about race, we've encountered racism together against him as friends, as an ally of him, but it was just, like you said, it was an interesting thing that we talked about in the time. This is because of all the traumatized sort of place he was in. He's in Oakland now, so a lot of things were happening. He has a space that was vandalized, even though, so, but going through all that, it was a different kind of conversation for us. And I've been friends with him. He was the best man at my wedding. It's like, it was interesting, and we were able to process that, but recognizing what you just said is worth, he's glad I reached out. I asked him if there's anything I can be to help as a friend, as an ally. He knows that I'm one of his closest friends, but it was important to state. But I really resonate with what you just said. It is a different conversation, and it is worth having with people in your circle.
Absolutely.
I mean, I would also add that it's important to ask your BIPOC loved ones what you can do to help too, right? Because we don't want to just assume we know what's best for them, right? And so after we validate, after we empathize, is also asking, like, is there anything I can do to help? Like, how can I create the space to help you feel safe? Or is there anyone you want me to reach out to? Like, what can I do to help? I'm going to take your lead in this one, right? Especially if we know BIPOC people are often feeling like they're not heard, feeling like people are stealing from them, appropriating from them. They're not really given the platform. It's really important for us to see them in a elevated place of they're the experts in their experience, right? And so we can't assume we know what's best for them. It's important to ask, like, what do you want from me? What would you need from me to help you?
Yeah, Akeera, and when I heard Anna say that, that's what made the most sense to me as we started going through Black Lives Matter and me trying to get involved. But a piece of advice that I received from one of my Black friends when I reached out was that they felt really exhausted with people asking them what they could do. And I did kind of identify that, as much as I can when I was a new mother and people reaching out to you, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And you're just emotionally exhausted by that. And so I could kind of empathize with that aspect of it too, that I can assume it's exhausting to be reached out to in that way as well. So I think, Akeera, like you said, reaching out and asking what they need, and maybe what they need is, space to heal and to grieve. And, we're all different, right? The same thing as self-care. It's very individual as we go through this process, I'm sure. And so I think that that's a little bit of my nervousness as a white ally is, what is the right step? But I think that certainly the wrong step is to do nothing, right? And so that's what I've learned a little bit as I'm going through this journey.
Right. Sorry, Anna, you go ahead first. Sorry.
We both turned it on at the same time. But I just wanted to add that, like, the asking of what do you need from me, like, asking is one of the most powerful tools you can have in your relationships, because you cannot assume what people need at any given moment. And so even, like, say with the debates that have come up, which have been very triggering for many people, there are times where I want to talk about it on my own and I want to dive into it. But there are certain friends I have that are either queer, that are either other BIPOC individuals, any type of marginalized group. And I ask them, do you have space for this right now? Is it okay if we talk about this right now? And being okay with a no, saying, no, I cannot talk about it right now. Like, maybe let's do it sometime in the future. And knowing that I have a web of support, I can go to someone else that potentially wants to talk about it. So asking is just like a powerful key that I don't think people utilize enough.
I feel like we're on the same wavelength, Anna. But yeah, I was actually going to echo the same. I think for me, the worst thing we can do is ignore the experiences of the BIPOC community, right? So the best thing we can at least do is acknowledge their pain, acknowledge their experience, but also recognize that the emotional toll they're under, right? And so it's not really up to the black and brown and BIPOC individuals to answer or figure out how to fix the system, because honestly, we didn't make the system, right? But I think for me personally, my loved ones who knew me well was just like, I see you, I'm thinking about you, I'm having these conversations in my family, you mean the world to me. Please let me know if there's anything I can do, and when you're ready to talk, I'm here, right? And so recognizing, like, hey, I see you, I'm thinking about you, I know you're probably going through it, was enough to make me feel I had the support. And them also saying like, this, you mean the world to me, them reaching out to my racist X, Y, and Z to have these conversations, or I'm teaching my children X, Y, and Z about your experiences, because I don't want the future to be experiencing what you and your other Black and brown and BIPOC individuals have been experiencing for centuries, right? And so we don't always have to know how to fix it, but at least we can create space and validate the experience.
Yeah, Arabia just commented, you have to give people space. And I love what Anna said about, sort of, may I approach the bench? Like, are you able to handle this conversation now or not, in a pressure-free question? That's a really beautiful way to approach anybody, a friend, an ally, a peer, another person, just to see if you won't be contributing to their stress or fatigue, but open up a dialogue in a mutually beneficial way. And that's a really nice way to do it, Anna. I appreciate you saying that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Akeera, you saying that I see you, I think that that's really powerful too. So that acknowledgement of I see you, and like Anna was saying, do you asking if you have space for this? I think that those are two really powerful things, that even if you don't have space right now, I see you and I'm holding space when you're ready, if you're ready, Pat, I saw you unmute briefly.
Yeah,
I wanted to...
No, I was just kind of going to reiterate what everyone was saying about Anna's comment. I've never really thought of actually saying that to someone in that way, but I really liked it as well, because in a way it's like empowering to who you're talking to, and you sort of set them up to create their own boundary, because if they're uncomfortable setting that boundary with other people, you kind of allowed them to do that. And by giving them that, it sort of ties into that self-care and everything that we're talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, we've gone over a lot so far when it comes to self-care and resilience and support from the white allies. And I really appreciate everyone's input so far. And I think that this is hopefully starting a lot of conversations with those who are watching, and hopefully the students in our community who's watching, they think about reaching out to their BIPOC community and asking these questions, how can I be helpful? Are you ready to talk about these things? I think, Anna, you bring up a really good point about the debates and how triggering that can be, and making sure that we're checking in with our friends who may be triggered by that and asking how you might be able to be helpful, and acknowledging them, as Akeera pointed out, that this is a really important time to be doing those things. So thank you.
One other thing I might add to these kind of questions is, and Lauren knows a lot about this, and some of the others in the call, it's something called motivational interviewing. But one of the basics of that is asking how or what questions, which means questions that begin with how, or questions that begin with what. Like, how are you doing? What do you need? Not, do you need me to help you do this? That's a very different question than, how are you feeling? How are you? Do you need anything from me? What can I do to help you? Sorry. Like, those questions are very, how or what questions are very open-ended, which allows people to set their own boundary in their answer and walking into their answer in a way that works for them, not pinpointing them into a yes or no corner that they may not be willing to be in at that moment. So it's again, starting questions with how or what. As therapists, that also is what we do sometimes, but it's a general great way to communicate with others, especially about a sensitive topic or one that you're being sensitive to.
Right. Definitely, Matt. I also want to add that it's important for white allies to really do the heavy lifting in regards to like checking their own stuff, right? And really being honest with themselves. And so for me, on a personal note, I don't know if everyone on this call knows, but my partner is white, right? And she is a very inclusive being and lived in Hawaii for many years and loves brown and Black circles. But I started using a controversial statement of like, all white people are racist, right? And usually white people get really triggered by that statement. But she's over time been able to reflect and recognize, like, she, as well as everybody who's grown up in the US, have been indoctrinated under a racist system. And so for you to feel like you're not racist just because you love Black and brown people is a lie, right? And so I think the best thing we can do as white allies is really unearthing the internalized racism that we have, or the internalized racism that we are all carrying with us, right? Me as a Black individual had to really uproot that, and I still continue to try to uproot that. And so I think it's one of the best things we can do to help propel our society forward is recognizing our own racism within us too.
Yeah, to comment on that and sort of tie things in again. I was gonna say before, I think Akeera started talking to, well, she's saying like kind of acknowledging our own feelings, and like acknowledging the implicit bias or the conditioning that we've all probably unconsciously been exposed to our entire lives, but also to acknowledge how we think and feel in general, whether it's regarding like race or stress or triggers. And if we don't take the time to kind of think how we're feeling, mentally, but also feeling physically and how they're tying together, then that's going to over time wear us down. And it could, be expressed in different ways, like, irritability or anger, or defensiveness, especially when it comes to race. Defensiveness is very big in the white community. As a white ally, I try to talk to a lot of white people about what's been going on, and I have constantly since everything's kind of blown up in the past few months. And sort of like what Arabia is saying in the chat, that it can feel overwhelming to have to keep educating others, and it is exhausting. And I think I've mentioned this to Akeera, that I've only been doing this for, maybe a couple years, and even more so recently. So I can only imagine how like Black and brown communities that have been trying to educate or bring awareness to the issues for hundreds of years, how they feel just as individually and as a community. But yeah, it's a lot of factors play into all of this, and I think just empathizing, acknowledging, and affirming other people and ourselves can go a long way.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I've also been saying, the 5 love languages that we throw out there, right? I've been adding activism as one, right? I personally have been telling my inner circle it's not enough to be my ally. You have to also be an activist too, right? You can't just be doing the passive work, right? You have to actively be fighting for my life to exist in a safe space, right? And so I think activism is very much a love language, especially when you're in multicultural or different identity settings. We have to be able to advocate for our loved ones who are experiencing oppression in many different levels.
Akeera, it's so strange to hear you say that, because my best friend, so she's with a new partner, and she said that they connect that their love language is activism. And we had this whole conversation last weekend about it, and they're both very active in advocating for their BIPOC communities out in Colorado. But it's so strange to hear you say that, like that was the exact conversation this weekend. So I'm sure that there's more people who agree and feel you on that and resonate with that.
Yes, that's awesome that she finds it to be a love language. It definitely is one for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add quickly, I love what you said, Pat, about how you're educating white people in your circle as well. I noticed that there's a lot of white allies that don't necessarily know where to start in terms of learning and advocating. And this is good natured. It's not meant to say that anyone's doing anything wrong, but at times, like, I'll notice someone's like DMing a Black educator on Instagram about a question that's very sensitive, or just asking their Black friends, like, well, how does it feel when X happens? And not only can it be triggering and re-traumatizing, it can also be exhausting to have to say the same things over and over again. And so I've always recommended to white allies that want to learn that there's a bunch of books out, there's a bunch of YouTube videos, there's a bunch of movies, like YouTubers alone that have talked about this issue. And like that energy is already stored in a video. Like you can access that at any point. No one has to re-exhaust themselves. And then teaching that to white people in your circles, like taking some of the load off your BIPOC allies is so important. So thank you.
I'm also going to throw in that, Anna, there's also apparently Reddit threads too and Reddit communities where like they're literally dedicated to just teaching you about that stuff too.
And I, like every white person in America, have been reading White Fragility, but it's such a helpful tool. And Akeera, hearing you talk about how you were saying that every white person is racist, you know, I really like how the author breaks down how you need to look at what your definition of racism is, and that it's not an evil thing. It doesn't mean that you are evil necessarily, but it means that you have these preconceived notions that are either conscious or unconscious in the way that you treat different communities. And if you disagree with that, I just think it's the silliest thing that if you disagree with that. And then Pat put in the conversations here, uncomfortable conversations with a Black man. Yeah, I've been watching on Instagram. Is it on YouTube as well? I've been watching them on Instagram.
So he was a football player. I don't even know, I came across it like on Facebook a few months ago. And since then he's made like a bunch of YouTube videos, and I think he's been on like the news maybe. And he has a conversation with like Matthew McConaughey, like celebrities. And they go over and he's very articulate and really breaks down just things that like just white people just like don't understand. They don't understand, or they just don't know, or they're just like refusing to understand. But I explain things very simplistically. And he's pretty engaging to watch. They're good videos to watch.
Thank you. And before I forget, Akeera, we have been talking about Audre Lorde quite a bit, and you mentioned that you referenced some of her works, and I was wondering if you could recommend any of her works for us who are looking to learn.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I literally just finished her essays, and honestly, it's not coming to me exactly the name of it, so let me look it up. But she has tons of work out there. Actually, there's a modern Audre Lorde type book out there, which is called Eloquent Rage. And so there's this Black female professor who kind of reiterates a little bit of what Audre Lorde has written about. But Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde is a really good one. It's pretty popular. But Audre really focuses on intersectionality. So the other thing I've really been pushing people to think about a little bit more is like a lot of our civil rights and laws that we have is still really comes from Black women and Black queer and trans people. So I think it's really disheartening, especially with, you know, everything that continues to happen with the Black women and Black queer women. It's really disheartening that we don't really get we get barely the crumbs of the work that we really put in. So Audre really talks about what it's like to be a Black queer woman, what it's like to be a Black woman, and fighting for the justices against injustices that we face on a regular basis. I was watching this video about educational system and utilizing the teachings of Black and brown civil rights movers about abolishing the education system that we have today. And one of the speakers there was saying the reason why Black women and Black queer women are always at the forefront is because we really know what it's like to not get access to. We know what it's like to really be oppressed. And so we're always empathizing with other communities who are facing oppression because we're experiencing it on many different levels. So that really resonated with me too. But Audre Lorde really talked a lot about that as well.
I'm totally going to put you on the spot here, Akeera, because what you just said had me thinking. So during this crazy time of 2020, I'm homeschooling my children, and this coming Monday, as we all know, is what is officially termed Columbus Day, but in this household, we celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. And I'm wondering, Akeera, if, given our conversations previous to this call, if you had any recommendations on how we might be able to honor and celebrate that community on Monday.
Yeah, I love Indigenous culture. Right now I'm reading Braden Sweetgrass, which is an awesome book. She's really brilliant. I recommend that one too. But I mean, so the other thing I've been trying to dismantle the appropriation about in regards to mindfulness, right? And so we know mindfulness comes from the Buddhist tradition, but it's also regarding indigenous and tribal traditions as well. And so indigenous people are really big on reciprocity, and whatever we put out there, we believe comes back to us. And so I think for you, the best thing you can do is really indulging yourself in nature, because indigenous people really love nature. And when they look at nature, they look at nature as other human beings. They don't look at nature as artificial or just like basic living things. They look at it as complex systems that also communicate with each other, that also love each other. And so I think if you want to really celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day, especially with like the environmental injustices we're experiencing, is allowing your children to go outside in nature and really cultivating an appreciation for the world we're around. Another fun fact about Indigenous people is in our language, um, 70% of our words are nouns, which really shows our obsessions for cultivating and owning things, right? So we know in white supremacist thinking, it is all about ownership. But in indigenous language, 75% of their words are verbs, which is all based on giving back and doing. So if you can do anything like that, I think will definitely help your children appreciate the indigenous cultures.
Wow. That is an extremely tactful response for putting you on the spot. Look at that. It's citing statistics and everything. And that's beautiful. Thank you. I will absolutely do that. I think that that's a fantastic way to honor Indigenous people. Thank you.
No problem. There's also a really good museum in upstate Connecticut too that their Indigenous people have made, and they do artifacts and all of that stuff. So I recommend that place as well.
Thank you. Oh, what was the name of the book again?
Braiding Sweetgrass. So it's about, I think it's she's a professor, an Indigenous professor that's all about, like, talks a lot about nature and the Indigenous wisdom as well.
Thank you.
I want to just ask a question to the group, and I don't know what the answer is or if there's an answer, but taking it back to like the Purchase community a little bit. We talk about self-care, and the Wellness Center has always had a lot of self-care type events put on by our interns mostly, but a lot of our open house type things have self-care stations. That's always an interest by our interns and the students who are helping us. And I guess, is there anything we could try to focus on to make a self-care event outside of the awareness of where that word came from, which is a really good one, to make that more accessible and also accommodating and also informative to other communities in the campus?
I think that's a great question. And I think that's something that we can ask the interns to look at, and they're doing their programming. And I think that a lot of what we discussed here today, it can be something that we really take into account when we're planning these things, you know. I think what's really important, and something that I've learned, again, as a white ally going through this, is that I never stop to take the time to have even to consider the BIPOC community in our planning of these things. And I think that that's the most important thing for me, is to stop and to really be mindful. And Akeera helped me be mindful even with the title of this event, that to slowing down and being mindful of our movements.
You know, one thing that was illuminating to me, I guess it would have been in the fall. So we have the Lighthouse program, which is a recovery community, a substance recovery community from the Wellness Center. It's kind of, now in a virtual state, but a few of the students, in talking to the students and attending some recovery-based, collegiate recovery-based workshops and webinars, recognizing the marginalized population of those in recovery, but extra so those who are in recovery and in the BIPOC community, and even those who are in recovery, BIPOC community, and sort of trans or some LGBTQI community, extremely marginalized group on many levels, and hearing members of that community speak, going into these spaces to find safety and help and not seeing anyone look like them, and how they encounter that, just really eye-opening, and something we'd love to be able to plan for and help with, but it's hard to do when the community looks a certain way. And just convince someone that it's safe or it feels good to have to get that invitation or feel that way. But a very eye-opening comment, and I've heard it a few times in a few places.
Yeah, I agree with you, Matt. But I think so. I don't know if we can really plan a lot of what we can't plan for a whole event in like a couple of seconds. But I think what to take away is like being able to have BIPOC people be able to see themselves in either the way you word the event, the way you advertise, the pictures you choose, right? So Pat and I was talking about we are struggling to find a predominantly brown and black hands holding, and so really being intentional with your programming, calling out, literally naming BIPOC people too, I think is also intentional as well, because there's an assumption that the spaces that we're walking into is going to be predominantly white. And so if you're putting out there like, hey, this is for white and BIPOC, or this is to celebrate the BIPOC community or whatever, like that, being intentional and really putting out there the words you're using and the images you're using can help bring those, or even like bring out all those underrepresented communities.
It's kind of, I don't know if it's a weird question, Akeera, for you. So I always like how you mentioned, like specifically mentioned like for white people and BIPOC. So I hear a lot like in the white community or like on social media, like it wasn't about race until you brought it up. Like I was curious, like what you think about like when people say that as a response to things.
Meaning like, can you reword the question, Pat, for me?
So like how you mentioned that things like if you were going to make an event to like specifically say like this is for white people and BIPOC to make it more inclusive, and I know some people respond with things and be like, well, why did they have to say it that way? Like why couldn't it just be everyone? Like it wasn't about race until that was brought up. So I was just wondering your views on that type of response.
Yeah, I hear you. That's actually funny because my partner and I was having that conversation a few months ago. I was looking for just black spaces, right? And I was like, babe, can you Google black spaces? And she felt it was racist to like, she's like, well, I can't Google white spaces. And I was like, because there's an assumption everywhere I'm stepping into is a white space. You don't have to Google a white space, right? And so it's really like, I think, yes, I hear you when it comes to some people struggling with the idea of like races and everything. But when you're a BIPOC individual, race, everything boils down to racism in our experiences, right? And so I think that's the privilege for white people to say, well, it wasn't about race when we're living in a world full of color. And so I think acknowledging the unique experiences people of color have is the best thing we can do for those individuals by creating spaces for them. I think also one thing we can do is, I'm not saying we always have to separate the different groups, right? But I think one thing we can do is also create a space, right? Naming like bringing the two groups together, right? I can't come up with a creative name at this time, but if you can do something where you highlighting how we can come together as a community, I think that's also a way we can make it more inclusive as well.
Akeera, thank you for those interesting questions. That's good advice. Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem. Mm-hmm.
And Akeera, I'm going to throw it back to you once again as our counseling representative. If we have anybody who's watching this who is looking to maybe get some help with their substance misuse, if they are feeling overwhelmed and they're feeling like that's contributing to their substance misuse, I wonder if you can help us talk about how somebody gets access to help through Purchase.
Yeah, so I think this year we're all virtual, unfortunately, right? So you can always reach out to the counseling center and you can meet with one of the counselors there. And if you're struggling with substance use, we always refer to the wellness center, so that will be your team. But everything is virtual, so just reach out to the counseling center and we will direct you to to the right department, whether it's wellness center, whether it's, you know, Title IX, or wherever you need to go, we will direct you there. The phone number is 914-251-6390. Yeah. Is that what you put in the? Yes. So
Yeah.
thank you, Matt. But yeah, so you can always reach out to the counseling center.
Thank you so much.
I just grabbed that from your website, so easier.
Thank you, Matt. Matt and I have been on these calls a couple times. He can read where my brain is going with that. I appreciate that.
You started to type, Lauren, so I was giving a second to make sure we didn't both paste the same.
Thank you. Yeah. So if anybody's looking for help, whether you're questioning if you want to access help or not, the Counseling Center is a great place to start, just to find out more information about what resources are available, and they will get you to the appropriate person on campus to access help. I want to thank everyone on the call today. This has been an excellent discussion, and like I said, I think I speak for everyone on the call when we say that we hope that this helps to start some conversations with the people who are watching this, and ask some really good questions and provide some really good support for one another. Again, this is a part of our Red Zone Prevention Friday series. We have 2 more weeks left in our series. I encourage you all to come back next week for our presentation on COVID and substance misuse and get some good information on that. And then on October 23rd, we have a very special event doing a Narcan training that will train individuals on how to prevent the overdose of opioids. And that's a free training that's open to the entire Purchase community. So hop over to the wellness webpage. Yep, Matt is already on top of it, putting it in the chat box there, and you can see all of our upcoming events. So yes, thank you again, and I hope everyone has a great weekend, and happy Indigenous Peoples Day on Monday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.